My joke that I always say, I work at a high school, right? And I teach a theology of the body class, and I always give them the whole theology is the queen of the sciences, so it's objectively more important than your math class.
That's right.
Like, objectively. There's no arguing. Don't argue with me. That's how God designed it, right?
That's right.
But to shift gears a little bit and to go back into some of the medical stuff, and don't take any offense at this, but
oh boy,
I view psychology as like my initial take is that's just people plying folks with brain drugs, right? And it almost seems antithetical to, I don't know. I kind of want you to defend psychology as a science through the context of our Catholic faith.
Yeah.
Right. Because
it needs to be defended.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. There's a lot of talk, right? I hear stuff all the time. I was listening to, Michael Knowles or Matt Walsh or one of those guys recently. And they were basically just kind of crapping on modern psychology in general. And so I would love to hear, your defense of it.
Yeah. So there's some fairness in kind of like being skeptical of psychology. Just like I think it's fair to be skeptical of medicine. Ultimately, these things are sciences. Right. So if they're sciences, which means a study of something that's aimed at knowledge, right? So if they're sciences, then they shouldn't be insecure about criticism. And they should be able to receive that criticism and then respond to that criticism. Sure. So I just wanted to kind of like preface that. Like, I think that it's good for us to be critical. And I think that we should be critical, especially of things as important as medicine and psychology. And I don't know if this is like a broader sort of division that people would make or identification, but I'm just like, I guess it's my philosophy education at Hillsdale that makes me want to define everything and categorize everything.
Got to define terms where you can discuss anything.
That's right. Yeah. And I think medicine is the study of the physical side of man, and psychology would then be correspondingly the study of the soul, the study of the non-physical side of man. It's literally the study of the soul. Suke logos is the study of the soul.
Yeah. Okay.
So, or it's the logic of the soul, being really technical. But I think that's actually the way in for a Catholic to understand why psychology is important, even in a Catholic framework. Because often we see this picture of psychology as trying to like explain away all of the beauty and mystery of human thought. And
that's my knee-jerk reaction, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm gonna drug you till you act normal. That's like what I think of.
Oh yeah. Well, there's the problem too. Yeah.
Right.
And that's an issue that I'm thinking a lot about, because I'm going to be one of the rare psychologists who can prescribe drugs. I'm going to be a psychiatrist.
Right.
So, and I recognize as well that there's a problem with just prescribing a drug because it'll fix the problem, because sometimes that's not the best solution to the problem. It's not the one that's most fitted to the actual human person in front of you. But psychology itself, since it is the study of the logic of the soul, it's something that we would, as Catholics, be very interested in. And it's not the study of the soul in the same way that a priest can study the soul. Because a priest can study the soul with respect to the spiritual realities that bring man up to God.
Sure.
And the psychologist is doing that in one sense, but not in the theological sense. In the philosophical sense, kind of like in a similar way that you can distinguish theology and philosophy. I think you could distinguish the role that the priest has in shepherding souls and in the care of souls. You could distinguish that from the psychologist's care of souls, which is more akin to philosophy, whereas the priests would be more akin to theology.
Sure.
So it's like, that's a way of maybe breaking it up and showing that the psychologist should not be impinging upon the spiritual. And in fact, when that happens, I think that there's some that's a type of malpractice almost. And that's part of what I think we see in some of the dangerous practices of modern psychologists, is that they start to get their practice of their science starts to become infiltrated by a religious framework that isn't their domain.
Sure.
I guess. And so that we could get more into that. There's a lot going on there, because you get that both from the Christian side of things and also from like the Buddhist side, which I think is the most common one. Eastern spirituality is very common in psychology. That's one of the things that should make us rightly skeptical, is that when a psychologist starts to stray into the domain of the priest, then it's like, okay, what's really going on here? Or are you just a secular priest?
Right.
And the reality is they shouldn't be a secular priest. What they're studying should be a little bit different. What they're studying should be closer to the kind of the studies of Aristotle almost. Now, I think a lot of psychologists would probably laugh at the idea that they should study Aristotle, but Aristotle had insight into the human soul.
Everyone should study Aristotle.
Everyone should study Aristotle. Thank you.
Yeah,
yes.
we read, it's not Aristotle, but we read the Great Dialogues of Plato in my class every year, my ancient history class, right? We end the semester with the Great Dialogues of Plato, and it's and all it is, you know, Plato, I know you know this, but just for anybody listening at home, right? Socrates teaches Plato, Plato teaches Aristotle, who teaches Alexander the Great, which awesome. Has nothing to do, but it's really neat. No, it is amazing. I remember the first time I read Nicomachean Ethics, and I had a class when we really got into that.
Oh, that's a good one.
Like my brain coming out of my ears kind of stuff. Right. It's so important and especially as a pagan, right?
Yeah.
As a righteous pagan, right? Him still using his like philosophy and logic to pick up on all these eternal truths that exist. Yeah. And I mean, he was a Christian before Christ was here. It's crazy. Yeah.
It's really wild. Yeah. Oh man. Yeah. Study Aristotle.
I'm sorry. I didn't mean to derail your defense of psychology.
No, that's kind of right to the point though, is it's like, what do you get from Plato and Aristotle and from philosophy more generally? You get a picture of the human person and his proper end and like what people are made for and what we're supposed to be. And ultimately that should be the domain of psychology to some degree as well.
Sure.
Psychology should understand what are human beings and what are all of the parts of human beings in the human mind and the human soul, and what are their proper objects, and how can I help the person to overcome the difficulties that are incumbent upon being a human being, using my knowledge of how a human being is constituted. So like, what's the structure of the brain? How does that correspond to the structure of the mind? And then how does their body have what does their body have to do with the way that their mind is functioning? What does their environment have to do with the way that they're behaving and the way that they feel? And so like a psychologist is supposed to take knowledge about that domain of things and to help the other person to come to recognize the truth in that person's life, so that they can then build a habit of action that's closer to what is like the eudaimonia of Aristotle. What's the good life, the good way of living? That means like happiness in the truest sense of happiness. Psychology is supposed to help people to learn how to live the good life.
All right, guys, John Henry Spann here. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this, make sure you check out the full video. Also, make sure that you like, subscribe, and share it with anybody who you might think is interested. Thanks for being here.